I remember it like it was yesterday, Christmas Day 1997. My father had previously borrowed an issue of GamePro magazine from my brother and I in order to get the scoop on the hottest games coming out. That Christmas we received NASCAR 98, Fighting Force, which I have fond memories of playing even if it didn't hold a candle to my beloved Streets of Rage, and my first introduction to the Tomb Raider series, Tomb Raider 2. I would later acquire the very disc I'm using for this review at a rummage sale for $10, and despite the awkwardness of jumping back from Tomb Raider 2 to the original, have since come to appreciate the original as probably the best in the original Tomb Raider series, even if Tomb Raider 2 is still my favorite. I've only in recent years acquired the rest of the series on the PS1 and PC, so my main experience with the original Tomb Raider series revolves around the first two Tomb Raider games. Brought up in the comfort of the British aristocracy, at 21 years old, Lara's life was forever changed when her plane went down during a skiing trip to the Himalayas. Forced to survive by herself, Lara would walk into a local village 2 weeks later. After her experience, Lara was hooked on adventure, and not even being disowned and cut off by her own family would stop her tomb raiding adventures, publishing the journals of which would bring her fame and fortune. Though the game's manual makes it seem as if Lara had only ever lived a life of comfort and had never been adventuring before, the story would later have a revision of sorts with the addition of young Lara in Tomb Raider: The Last Revelation. The opening cinematic shows Lara being enticed by a lady named Jacqueline Natla into finding an ancient artifact known as the Scion, an artifact rumored to give immense power to the person who wields it. This, however, is not going to be an easy task, seeing as the Scion has been split into 3 pieces and spread throughout the ancient world. The game's story is unfolded through the use of CGI cinemas and in-game sequences, though storytelling in 1996 gaming had a minimal focus outside of RPGs. Tomb Raider's story is fairly cinematic compared to a lot of other games released in that period of time. Lara's quest for the Scion will span 15 levels in 4 locations, which include ruins in Peru, Greece, Egypt, and ending in the lost city of Atlantis. The game's design is spectacular. The levels, though daunting at first, still show some of the best blending of exploration, puzzle elements, and action-based gameplay of that early 3D era of gaming. Core did an exceptional job in the level designs in this game, and the quality still shines through to this day. Games like Tomb Raider are the reason we all fell in love with 3D gaming. So I may as well just get it out of the way. The most incessant amount of whining I've heard levied against Tomb Raider by its detractors over the years pertains to the game's controls. I'll be the first to admit that Lara is insanely hard to control. Her control mirrors games like Resident Evil, where pressing up is the only way to move forward, regardless of the camera angle. This tank control scheme, as it was later dubbed, has an extremely steep learning curve, and her jumping system also has an extremely steep learning curve. However, controlling Lara is obviously not impossible, and the game does offer a very well-made training mode for new players to get a handle on the controls. Though when you think about it, going back from modern control schemes to Tomb Raider's controls puts you at the same disadvantage those of us who jump from 2D control schemes that we were used to into new 3D control schemes at the dawn of the 3D era of gaming. If you're too young to have experienced the 3D revolution, but want to know what it was like, go back and play Tomb Raider. One must also take into account that Tomb Raider started development and was released before analog gaming really took off. That being said, 8-way run controls with the D-pad, or even analog controls like those found in Mario 64, would not work for this game. Now you may wonder how I could make such a claim, but you must keep in mind that all the levels in Tomb Raider are on a square-based grid. The controls are more formulaic in nature to take advantage of a square grid. By using Lara's ability to look around and scoping out the jump in front of you, you can predetermine if you can make the jump with a simple forward jump, or if you need a running jump. This requires a little bit more discernment on the player's part than the average platformer game does, but Tomb Raider in general requires you to put a lot more thought into everything you do. The difficult controls also help combat a problem that plagued 3D games with a third-person perspective for years: bad camera angles. Tomb Raider does have its share of bad camera angles, but as I stated previously, you don't actually have to see the jump to make the jump. Lara's ability to look around means you can plot out your jump before you even start moving, with the confidence that you are going to make it, even if you're jumping blind. I'm not excusing bad camera angles, but as an early 3D game, they were still working out these simple mechanics that we take for granted in today's gaming. When jumping in Tomb Raider, it doesn't matter what the camera does, because there is only one way to move forward. Even if the camera shifts to a completely different view mid-jump, Lara will still make the jump. The tank controls may not be ideal, but they do have their advantages. Compared to modern games, the controls themselves also have an open feel to them. Lara does not automatically grab ledges. You have to manually hold a button in order for her to grab them. This can make the complicated controls feel more complicated, especially if you're used to modern games that automatically grab the ledges for you. I, however, like this aspect because it lets me have complete control over everything Lara does. I understand the merits of having characters automatically grab ledges, but it sometimes leads to control issues when trying to do things like drop down to a lower ledge in modern games that use it. To let go of a ledge in Tomb Raider, I just let go of the X button and she drops. In many modern games, sometimes just trying to fall down to the ledge below is made more complicated because characters usually turn around and grab the ledge as they fall. I realize these design measures in modern games are to prevent you from accidentally plummeting to your death from falling off the ledge, which can be a very common occurrence in Tomb Raider, but I still prefer to have complete control. The grab feature isn't perfect in Tomb Raider, but it still works great. Due to the square grid, you nearly have to be lined up perfectly with the ledge to grab it. There is some forgiveness for not being perfectly square to the ledge, but the game is still a lot less forgiving about it than most. This can oftentimes lead to Lara plummeting to her death because you weren't lined up just right with the ledge, and can lead to frustrating backtracking because of the save crystal system in the game. I've been playing Tomb Raider for over a quarter of a century now, and yes, even I sometimes fumble over the controls. However, modern control schemes didn't come to us overnight. It took years of refinements and tweaking of established control schemes to get where we are today. It also took the release of dual analog controllers, not available at the time of Tomb Raider's release, to finally get a good balance of camera plus movement controls. That being said, this game has an extremely steep learning curve when it comes to the controls. It always has. But that's just one of the things one must take into account when going back to play the original Tomb Raider series. You are forced to learn the tough controls under fire, and the game doesn't let up as soon as you start. If you've been spoiled by the soft touch of analog controls, going back to D-pad controls means you might literally play this game until your thumb bleeds. Not an attack on the controls, but if you've lost your old school callus, your thumb will be aching. Plus, there are many other reasons why you'll be gripping your controller tightly, which I'll get into later. The bad thing about Tomb Raider's level designs are that oftentimes it's not clear what to do or where to go next. This is one of the biggest complaints against the entire series. The game doesn't hold your hand, and you will find yourself completely lost and backtracking through an entire level trying to figure out what to do in order to progress. In fact, complaints over this design choice were voiced so loudly, and the backlash against it so great, that even to this day developers have completely sterilized their games of really tough puzzle elements, making modern puzzle elements in adventure games so easy they not only feel insulting to your intelligence, being so watered down, but they practically show you the solution from the second you enter a room, making you wonder why they even bothered adding puzzles to begin with. But the great thing about Tomb Raider's level designs are that oftentimes it's not clear what to do or where to go next. In other words, the bad thing is the game doesn't hold your hand. But the good thing is the game doesn't hold your hand. I myself have spent countless hours being lost in Tomb Raider, probably more than most of those who levied complaints against the series in its heyday. And while I do agree it is frustrating being absolutely stuck in the game, spending hours upon hours trying to figure out where to go next only to have a simple solution pop up, there's still something so completely satisfying about finally figuring it out on your own, without help. It's a tough form of satisfaction, one that you rarely see in gaming anymore. And after years of playing Tomb Raider and learning how to scan and search every inch of a level, I've found that very few games have been able to stump me since. I remember when Uncharted 2 first came out, I had a friend who was stuck on one of the puzzles for like a week. I came over and within 5 minutes solved it. I'm not saying that I haven't been stumped since, Shadow Man 2 and Primal come to mind, but because of the complaining, heavy puzzle focus in adventure games is a thing of the past, the exception being games like Zelda. Another complaint levied is with the puzzle objectives themselves. Yes, there is a lot of key grabbing, switch throwing, and block puzzles. The term and eventual hatred for block puzzles came from the backlash against Tomb Raider. When you understand that Tomb Raider has a unique blending of action and adventure with a heavy puzzle focus, and puzzle elements have tons of thought put into them, it's not not the means of unlocking the objectives that's important, like throwing a switch or moving blocks a certain way. It's the journey in between. Each level itself is a giant puzzle unlocked through solving smaller puzzles. Core Design took a lot of time designing every level in the game. There are no half-hearted puzzle elements in Tomb Raider. They are all well designed and well thought out, and the levels themselves are designed as one giant puzzle. Those who would criticize this game for its objectives being simple switch pulling, key gathering, and block puzzles tend to overlook the sheer amount of thought put into the level designs of this game. There is a certain attention to detail in the puzzle elements in this game that you rarely see anymore. And Tomb Raider isn't all puzzles. The game also shines in its action and adventure elements, which take place within the puzzle elements. As you may expect in typical Indiana Jones fashion, the ancient ruins are also filled with all sorts of booby traps, often sprung on you without warning. One can complain that this does lead to many cheap deaths, but the element of surprise adds to the tense atmosphere of the game, and the atmosphere is my favorite part of the game. Each level, aside from having a heavy puzzle focus, is rife with death traps and all sorts of baddies just waiting to pounce on you at any given moment. Some enemies are easy to see and easy to dispatch from the beginning of the level, but others are scripted to show up as you accomplish objectives. Pulling a switch or grabbing an item is the easy part. It unlocks the next part of the puzzle. However, it also unlocks consequences in the game. Just when you think you're safe, pulling that lever oftentimes brings enemies your way in areas you thought you had already cleared, or it springs a trap on you. You honestly never know what to expect. Add that to the fact that Lara is completely alone to explore, and the game has a sense of tension that rivals games in the survival horror genre. You honestly never know what to expect next, and you rarely feel safe in this game. You're alone, and you're in a hostile environment, with surprises around every corner. I've oftentimes found myself staring down a hallway in the game knowing full well that I have to go down that hallway to progress, but telling myself that I don't want to. There's something down there, it's gonna get me, and I know it. A feeling that easily rivals games like Resident Evil and Silent Hill. Sometimes you find yourself squeezing onto your controller for dear life, which adds to that pain in your D-pad thumb. There are so many unexpected surprises just waiting around every corner, whether it be an enemy lying in wait, or Pierre, the litterbug, who stalks Lara throughout most of the levels in the game, popping in at the most inconvenient times and disappearing just as fast. 2, and how could I not mention, one of the most memorable scenes of the game, and one of the most iconic scenes of that whole generation of gaming, the Tyrannosaurus Rex popping in to say hello. The music and sound effects in the game also add to the tension. Lara is usually surrounded in silence with some ambient sounds. You can hear everything in the environments around you, which adds to the lonely feeling in the game. Sometimes you can hear enemies around you, a growl breaking the silence and causing butt puckering. Yes, I really did just say that, as you run to the high ground for safety, so you can get a vantage point to see where the sound is coming from. Other times, at selected moments, one of the soothing themes plays, and adds almost a sense of wonder as you explore the ancient environments. It really does give you the feeling like you're the first person to see these environments in thousands of years. However, generally when you hear music in Tomb Raider, that means trouble is coming your way. Something bad is happening and you're filled with a sense of danger, and all you can think to do is run and hope you make it to the safety of high ground. You don't even know what you're running from yet, but the buildup of tension is done so well that fast-paced symphony music gets your adrenaline pumping and causes the aforementioned butt puckery. The voice acting in these story elements is surprisingly well done when you take into account that it was released in 1996, the same year as the original Resident Evil.
Stop it! Don't open that door!
Tomb Raider's voice acting was spectacular for its time and still holds up pretty well to this day. The music composed by Nathan McCree can both be soothing and, depending on when it hits in the game, pulse pounding. As stated, it's used sparingly in the game, leaving the player to mostly hear the sounds that Lara makes and those of the surrounding environments. A ton of thought was put into the sound designs of this game, and it really does add to the atmosphere. Graphically, even for its time, the Tomb Raider series was never considered a top-tier example of PS1 graphics. The frame rate generally moves at a consistent level with some stuttering in large open areas, but it's not enough to affect the gameplay. The textures are pretty pixelated, and Lara, whose character model in the first Tomb Raider is only made up of roughly 350 polygons, has some triangular features. If you're a snob about early 3D graphics, then this game isn't for you. Not because you can't deal with the game's visuals, but because I can't can't deal with annoying whining of those who still complain about PS1 graphics. It's design and gameplay that take precedent over visuals, and avoiding a game because it's ugly by today's standards is not a good reason to avoid a game at all. There are also a lot of clipping issues in the game, however this can actually be used to your advantage, allowing you to clip the camera through a door to see into a room you can't get to yet. Sometimes this can actually help you when you're trying to figure out where to go next. The Tomb Raider series didn't come into its own graphically by PS1 standards until Tomb Raider 3. Blocky, ugly textures pop in, clipping galore, and a number of glitches. Tomb Raider's visuals get the job done, but were never top tier graphics on the PS1. Playing the game on the PS2 with texture smoothing on really cleans up the pixelated textures. I know that some people are dead set against adding any kind of filtering or smoothing options to PS1 games, but I am not one of those people, seeing as I played PS1 games on the PS2 longer than I actually played them on the PS1. Having the PS2's bilinear filtering improve the visuals of PS1 games feels more at home to me, because I would almost always turn smoothing on when playing PS1 games on my PS2. The reason I am playing this footage on the PS2 with upscaling instead of using a PS3 to upscale, like I normally would, is I couldn't get the PS3 to load into a level. It would just freeze up on me. I tried the 3 different copies of this game I own, and the same thing, just freezes up. The PS3's backwards compatibility emulation is really good, but it's not perfect. There are some games that either won't run or will have various visual and sound glitches. That's why it's always good to have a hardware solution as a backup. When you take into account that Tomb Raider was in development for 3 years prior to its release, putting the start of its development in 1993, you start to realize exactly how revolutionary its level designs were. There was next to nothing for core design to draw inspiration from in the 3D realm of gaming. Yeah, Prince of Persia in 2D, but there was nothing in 3D for Tomb Raider to draw from. Tomb Raider was the standard bearer for what used to be dubbed the action-adventure genre of gaming, despite the fact that Tomb Raider has only really been given credit for cementing women characters as viable lead characters in games by the mainstream gaming press. Tomb Raider also had a profound effect on 3D gaming as we know it. Was it the most influential game in 3D gaming? No, but it definitely played its part, and was one of the big name games responsible for the 3D gaming revolution. 1996 was a landmark year for 3D gaming, and a year that arguably helped shape the games we play today like no other year in gaming history. By 1996, the next generation of home consoles was in full swing, with the release of the Nintendo 64, which took analog technology and shrunk it down into a thumbstick. id Software dropped a bomb on PC gamers with a little game called Quake that no one could argue with its online functionality, the use of a Voodoo 3D accelerator in GL Quake, the ancestor to all modern graphics cards, something that has deeply influenced modern PC and especially console hardware, releasing the source code to the average gamer, which opened up the door to tons of user modifications like the original Team Fortress, and licensing of the game's engine to other developers. That Quake was possibly the most influential game that year, and one of the most influential games of all time. Tomb Raider is just as worthy to be mentioned in the same sentence as both Quake and Mario 64, because it as well had a huge effect on gaming, regardless of the fact that later backlash against the series and this weird historical revisionism that has been going on as of late has robbed it from its rightful place in gaming history. Tomb Raider helped change gaming. The bottom line. The original Tomb Raider is still and will always be a classic, with its excellent mixture of action, exploration, and puzzle solving in a sometimes wondrous and oftentimes tense atmosphere. It may not get the credit it deserves, but it's one of those games that every gamer should at least give an honest try. The learning curve is high, and as it should, the game gets harder as it goes along, with the final level being borderline insane with what's thrown at you. You'll die a lot, you'll struggle with the controls, but you may even come to appreciate the masterful design and unique atmosphere. If you've never played it, you should. And don't be a wimp and play something like Tomb Raider Anniversary instead. Tomb Raider, since its release, has been ported to almost every platform under the sun, from the PS1 to the Saturn to the Mac and the PC, to even the Nokia N-Gage. You can still find the original Tomb Raider series on Steam, and with the remaster coming out soon, you'll also be able to play an updated version. As far as the remaster is concerned, my only real concern is if people complained about the controls whenever they re-released GoldenEye, how much worse are people going to complain about the controls in the Tomb Raider remaster? See, if they're just doing a remaster and not a remake or reboot, you can't change the controls in the original Tomb Raider series without changing the entire map design. I'm interested to see how they're going to work with the controls, but then again, maybe the remaster is for people like me who never actually quit playing Tomb Raider. We'll see if they can draw on new fans with this. We'll see if people will be able to get over the steep control learning curve and enjoy Tomb Raider for its excellent design and atmosphere. I guess time will tell. And if you happen to like heavy puzzle elements in your action games, I also thoroughly suggest my favorite core design PS2 effort, Project Eden, which also had a PC version back in the day. It's not for everyone, it has quite a few technical glitches, and is more focused on exploration and puzzle solving than action. I'm guessing that most will find it a little boring and lackluster in the action elements, but gamers with an open mind will be able to appreciate it, as will any of those who own a PS2 multi-tap, because it has 4-player co-op support. Project Eden is flawed, yet still a very engaging title for those who can get into it.